All right, fifth graders, so this is Mr. Combs here, and today we are going to be doing lesson 3 problem set. So I'm going to scoot this up just a tad. All right, and so the first thing that it's going to ask us to do is for 1A, we're going to construct an x-axis that passes through points A and B. Okay, so I'm going to scoot this up a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find points A and B. I know that my x-axis is my horizontal axis, the axis that goes from side to side. And so now I'm just going to really get my ruler nice and lined up. And I'm going to draw a straight line all the way across to create my x-axis. So I'm going to scoot this up and check off A, and then now we're going to move to B. Okay, B, construct a perpendicular, I'm going to underline this word perpendicular, y-axis that passes through points C and F. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find C and F. I know that my y-axis is my vertical axis, okay? And then if it's perpendicular, it's going to intersect this horizontal axis, kind of like an intersection of a street, okay? Or kind of like a cross, whatever shape, however you want to describe it. Okay, so I drew my vertical line there. One thing I'm going to do right now is, since I have that coordinate plane constructed, I'm going to erase that little tail end of my corner. And so your paper should look just like this, okay? We're going to label our origin now for C. Okay, we know that that origin is our starting point. And we're going to label that origin as 0, okay? All right, now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at this x-coordinate of B being 5 2/3. So I'm going to scroll down here, okay? And I'm going to label that as 5 2/3. All right, okay? Now what it's going to ask me to do is it's going to ask me to label the whole numbers along the x-axis. So when I see this 2/3, I can see that it would be split into thirds, that each one of these lines right here is going to equal 1/3. So now I'm just going to count by thirds until I get to my whole numbers. So I have 1/3, 2/3, 3/3 or 1. 1 1/3, 1 1/3, 1 2/3, okay, and then 2 wholes, okay, 2 1/3, 2 2/3, 3 wholes, 3 1/3, 3 2/3, 4 wholes, 4 1/3, 4 2/3, 5 wholes, 5 1/3, 5 2/3, 5 3/3, or 6. Okay, so now I have every single one of those whole numbers labeled on my x-axis. And so now that I can see, I'm going to do the same thing for E. So I see that the y-coordinate of C is 5 1/3. We're going to label the whole numbers along that axis. I'm going to label that C as 5 1/3. Okay, so once again, I can see that this is split into thirds, so I'm just going to count by thirds until I get to my whole numbers. So I have 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, or 1 whole, 1 1/3, 1 2/3, okay, and then 2 wholes, 2 1/3, 2 2/3, 3 wholes, 3 1/3, 3 2/3, okay, 4 wholes, 4 1/3, 4 2/3, 5 wholes, okay, and we can see how that works out with our C, 5 1/3, 5 2/3, and then 6 wholes, and we're going to stop at 6. Okay, so your paper, I'm going to just scoot it up a little bit. Hopefully you can all get on the screen. Your paper should look like my paper, and now we're going to move to the back, and we're going to start answering some questions about this graph. I'm going to be flipping, or about this coordinate plane, I'm going to be flipping back and forth a fair amount on this. Okay, so feel free to pause the video at any time. For all of the following problems, consider the points A through N on the previous page. Identify all of the points that have an x-coordinate of 3 1/3. So we're looking for an x coordinate of 3 1/3. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go all the way over on my x, okay, to 3 1/3. I see 3 holes. I'm moving 1 over to 3 1/3. I see that those points on there are going to be J, I, H, and D. 2A, J, I, H, and D. Okay, so we're done with that guy. For B, identify all points that have a y coordinate of 2 2/3. So now we're going to go on our y-axis all the way up to 2 2/3. So I see 2 holes, 2 1/3, 2 2/3. Okay, so F, now I'm going to go across. So F, E, H, and K, 2 2/3. F, E, H, and K. All right, so that's B. And then now we're going to look at this next one. Which point is 3 1/3 units above the x-axis and 2 2/3 units to the right of the y-axis? Name the point and give its coordinate pair. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this. Okay, so 3 1/3 above the x-axis and 2 2/3 to the right of the y-axis. So I'm going to start by going up 3 1/3. Okay, so 3 1/3 units up from the y-axis. So I'm going to put my pencil right here to save my spot. Okay, and then I'm going to go over 2 2/3 from the y-axis. And so 2 2/3 is going to go over and over and over. And then we're going to hit point G, okay? So that coordinate point, we always put the x first. So first of all, let's just put our points. So it's point G, okay? So it's point G. And then now what we're going to do is we are going to label this as our coordinate point. So 2 2/3 and then 3 1/3. Okay, 2 2/3 and then 3 1/3. That's going to be our coordinate point. Okay, for D, which point is located 5 1/3 units from the y-axis? So 5 1/3 units from the y-axis. So that's going away from the y-axis. So we're going to go to the right. Okay, so 5 1/3. I'm going to go down here on my x all the way over from my y-axis to 5 1/3, and then I'm going to scoot up, and I'm going to see that that's going to be point K. All right, okay, and then E, which point is located 1 2/3 along 1 2/3 units along the x-axis. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to our x-axis, 1 2/3. I'm going to keep going over. I see 1 hole, 1 1/3, 1 2/3. Then I'm going to see point M. Okay, that's going to be point M. Okay, all right. Okay, and now I'm going to start looking at F, and we're going to give those coordinate points for the following pairs. When we do these coordinate points, we always have our x-axis first, then our y, our x and our y. So first thing for K, we're going to look at K. I'm going to go all the way over on my x. I see that's 5 1/3. Okay, all right. And then now I'm going to go over on 2 2/3 to K. Five 1/3, and then 2 2/3. Five 1/3, and then 2 2/3. I'm going to pause the video right here just to be sure that we can upload the second half of this video for part 2. So thanks for listening.